The rancher had been riding since sunrise, the dry riverbed guiding his horse through a stretch of land most men avoided. The air was tense, heavy with the promise of trouble. He heard the shouting before he saw them, harsh laughter, cruel voices echoing off the rocks. Ahead, near a bend in the riverbed, a ruthless gang had surrounded a lone Apache woman. Her wrists were tied, her dress torn, dust and blood streaking her skin. Yet she stood straight, her dark eyes burning with defiance. One of the men grabbed her by the hair, forcing her to her knees, mocking her in a language she refused to answer. The rancher didn't think, he acted. His rifle came up, the first shot cracking through the still air. The man holding her collapsed instantly. Chaos erupted. The horse surged forward as the rancher fired again, dropping another attacker before the rest scattered for cover. Bullets tore into the rocks, dust exploding around him. But he kept riding, closing the distance, forcing the gang back with relentless precision. The leader shouted for retreat, fear cutting through his bravado. And within moments the men were fleeing into the hills, leaving silence and the smell of gunpowder behind. The rancher dismounted and approached carefully. The Apache woman watched him closely, ready to fight even now. He knelt, cut the ropes from her wrists and stepped back, giving her space. She flexed her hands, then accepted the canteen he offered, drinking slowly, never lowering her gaze. There was something powerful in her presence, something unbroken despite what had almost happened. "They won't stop hunting you out here," he said. "You need to get somewhere safe." She wiped her mouth and stepped closer, close enough that he could see the dried blood at her temple and the strength in her jaw. She placed her hand flat against his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her palm. "You faced death for me," she said quietly. "You spilled blood in my defense." He frowned, unsure what she meant. Anyone would have done the same. She shook her head. "No, many ride past. You did not." Her voice carried the weight of ancient law, older than the land beneath their feet. "By the ways of my people, a man who saves a woman without a husband, who risks his life so she may live, becomes bound to her." The rancher swallowed. "Bound how?" Her eyes never left his. The wind moved through the dry grass, and the world seemed to hold its breath. "You are my husband now," she declared. The rancher thought the words would fade once the danger passed, that they were spoken out of shock or pain. But the Apache woman did not take them back. She mounted her horse without asking permission and followed him as he turned toward his ranch, riding close enough that he could feel her presence like a steady shadow at his back. Miles passed in silence before she finally spoke, explaining in calm, deliberate words the law of her people. A woman without a husband, saved from death by a man who risked his own life, was no longer alone in the world. Protection was not temporary. It was a vow written in blood. "I never agreed to any vow," the rancher said as the ranch house came into view. "You agreed when you stood between me and death," she replied simply. That night, as if the land itself wished to test them, gunfire shattered the quiet. The same gang returned, angry and reckless, riding hard and fast. Bullets slammed into the fence posts and tore through the barn walls. The rancher grabbed his rifle, heart pounding, but before he could shout a warning, the Apache woman was already moving. She fought with a fierce, controlled precision, firing from cover, changing positions like a ghost in the dark. She was not hiding behind him. She was standing with him. When the shooting finally stopped, the attackers fled again, leaving behind the wounded and the dead. Smoke drifted over the land as dawn broke. The rancher leaned against the porch, bleeding from a shallow cut on his arm. Without a word, she stepped forward and cleaned the wound, her hands steady and gentle despite the violence that had just passed. Days followed, quieter but heavy with unspoken tension. She helped with the horses, learned the layout of the land, and watched the horizon like someone who knew danger never truly left. At night, she sat by the fire, speaking little, her presence filling the room in a way that unsettled and grounded him at the same time. He began to notice small things, how she calmed nervous animals, how she never wasted movement, how sorrow flickered in her eyes when she thought she was alone. She spoke of her people scattered by war, of family lost, of laws meant to ensure a woman was never left defenseless again. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the plains red, she looked at him and said, "Whether you accept this bond or not, I will not abandon you." For the first time, the rancher realized the truth. This was not a claim meant to trap him. It was a promise meant to protect them both. Trouble found the ranch the way it always did on the frontier, carried by whispers, dust, and men who refused to let old grudges die. Word spread that the gang had not only survived, but sworn revenge. And with the rumors came another presence riding in from the hills. One morning, the rancher woke to find Apache riders standing at the edge of his land. Their horses still, their eyes sharp and assessing. The Apache woman stepped forward to meet them, her posture proud, her voice calm as she spoke in her own tongue. An elder dismounted and turned his gaze to the rancher. His eyes were not hostile, but they were heavy with judgment. Questions followed, spoken slowly, each one demanding honesty. Had he fought for her when death was near? Had he placed his life between hers and those who would harm her? Had he offered shelter without demanding payment or obedience in return? The rancher answered each question without embellishment, feeling the weight of every word. The elder nodded, satisfied. The bond, he said, was real, not a whim, not a misunderstanding, but a vow shaped by survival. Breaking it would bring shame and danger, not only from the Apache people but from the land itself, which remembered such betrayals. The rancher felt a tightness in his chest as he realized how deeply entangled his fate had become with hers. The gang struck again before nightfall, desperate and fueled by hatred. They rode in hard, firing wildly, setting grass ablaze in a final attempt to erase what they could not control. This time the ranch was not alone. Apache warriors moved like shadows through the smoke, cutting off escape routes, striking with ruthless efficiency. The rancher fought alongside them, rifle hot in his hands, trusting the woman at his back as she trusted him at hers. When the last shot faded, silence returned to the plains. Bodies lay still, the fire dying as quickly as it had started. The elder stepped forward, holding a strip of leather marked with simple symbols. He bound the rancher's wrist to the Apache woman's, pulling the knot tight. "Two paths become one," the elder said, "not because of desire, but because survival demands unity." As the warriors departed, the rancher looked down at their bound hands. He felt no fear, only a strange sense of rightness. The world had tried to tear them apart, and instead it had forced them together. Whatever lay ahead, he understood now that walking away was no longer an option. The days after the final battle passed in a strange, fragile calm. The land healed slowly, scorched grass giving way to green. Broken fences rebuilt one post at a time. The rancher and the Apache woman moved through their days without ceremony, learning how to exist side by side in a bond that had begun with violence rather than choice. There was no celebration, no sudden tenderness, only shared work and quiet understanding. Yet in that silence, something deeper than obligation began to take root. At first, they lived like allies more than husband and wife. She rose before dawn, greeting the sun with a stillness that felt almost sacred. He watched her from the porch, struck by the strength in her calm. She taught him the names of the land in her language, explaining how every hill and river carried memory. In return, he showed her how to read the sky for storms, how to mend a saddle, how to mark time by the movement of cattle. Their worlds, once separate, began to overlap. At night, they shared the fire, speaking of things that had nothing to do with survival. She told him stories of her childhood before war scattered her people, of laughter around fires that no longer burned. He spoke of loneliness, of a life spent riding wide open spaces that echoed too loudly when the day ended. They listened without judgment, and trust grew where fear once lived. One evening, as the wind moved softly through the grass, she rested her head against his shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it carried more weight than any vow spoken aloud. He did not pull away. Instead, he covered her hand with his own, realizing the bond between them was no longer enforced by law or blood, but chosen in quiet moments like this. "I did not mean to claim you," she said softly. "I meant to survive." He smiled, a warmth spreading through him he hadn't known in years. "And somehow we did more than that." From then on, the word husband no longer felt like a burden, and wife no longer sounded like a sentence passed down by fate. They became partners, shaping a life built on respect, shared scars and hard-earned peace. On the frontier, love was never gentle. It was forged like steel under pressure through fire and strong enough to last.